Okay, this will serve as the lecture for the second part of the arthropod chapter. And the first lecture, make sure that you check out that video. Talks about the process of ecdysis and really most of the subphyla in this phylum. So we have kingdom, Animalia, phylum, Arthropoda, and then these four subphyla. Chelicerata, to do with their mouth parts, even down to the class for the horseshoe crabs, and then the spiders, ticks, mites, harvestmen, subphylum Crustacea, class Malacostraca. This is all the would be crayfish, lobsters, crabs, things. Myriapoda. Don't worry about this level, the class level for the myriapods. And then today is just subphylum Hexapoda. Hexa means 6, pod legs. This is basically a big subphylum that includes class Insecta. Today we're just talking about class Insecta. Okay. Here are some good essay type questions that you should study for the exam coming up. Okay. I'll discuss these as we go through the lecture. But you can always go to the book. These pages come from where you look for these answers in the textbook, which, as you all know, if you don't buy it, it is on reserve in the library. Why spend one whole lecture on one class? Well, this is your answer here. This comes from E.O. Wilson, Edward Wilson's Diversity of Life, and the size of these organisms is proportional to the number of species that has been described in that group. So including plants, right? Fungi, where is it? Protozoans would be 5, would be this little ciliate thing here. Monera, this is a funny one. This is the really old kingdom that includes all of the archaeans and bacteria. But regardless, you know, it's pretty amazing to me that all of the bacteria that are known and described only are this big, or were this big when this book was published. All the plants, really, just this big. All of the fungi. This little mite here and this giant fly are arthropods. And so this is today's lecture. Just one class, class Insecta, 13. Yeah. So, needless to say, just one class, but very important, ecologically important in terms of the diversity of life. A huge group here. Thinking about up to this point, you know, if we look at this phylogeny here, think about, you know, sponges live in the ocean. Cnidarians largely are still marine. Platyhelminths, marine, freshwater, or very moist soils. Mollusks, again, mostly still in the ocean, but anything that you find terrestrially is going to have to be restricted to really moist areas. Annelids, same thing. So largely we're talking about organisms that are aquatic or live in the ocean, specifically. Nematodes do moist soils. Arthropods is the first group of animals from this class that is truly terrestrial, right? And so, not surprisingly, they have physiological and anatomical adaptations that allow them to be successful in those habitats. Okay, so a couple of those things. One is just their exoskeleton. This chitinous exoskeleton is watertight. So the cuticle or skin of all these other groups up till now are not watertight. So if you take that organism out of the sponge, obviously, flatworm, earthworms, mollusks, you take them out of the water or put them in a drying environment, they will desiccate very quickly. Not so with insects because of that exoskeleton. Number two, they have those jointed appendages, allows them to move quickly on land, and in those appendages I would include the wings. And the wing has allowed insects to be able to disperse easily and quickly. So if conditions on land become too dry or too hot or too cold in this place, insects can just fly to another place. So we've got exoskeleton, appendages, including wings. A lot of moisture, water from organisms is used in excreting waste. So we've talked about those nitrogenous wastes that come from digesting proteins, and the ways that organisms get rid of those wastes. And a lot of times you take that nitrogenous waste, you dissolve it in water, and then excrete the water. That's what would be like fish or humans, right, our urine. But with insects, they lose very little water during excretion. They also lose very little water during respiration. So in order to breathe, which we'll talk about later how that is specifically attained in insects, there is not a high requirement for moisture and not a lot of loss of moisture. And let's see what else for terrestrial. So those are the big things that allow insecta to live in very dry terrestrial habitats. Metabolism is not, or metabolism, metamorphosis, or the change in shape of insects during their ontogeny or during their development. So as they grow, we see in many different insect lineages this complete change in shape from the young to the old. Now we can break down, there are three main types of metamorphosis, and again, this is a great comparison contrast type of essay question. Ametabolous means that there is really no metamorphosis to speak of, and so the juvenile hatches out of an egg, and then we have these instars. Remember, the instar is that period in between shed. So the organism grows. It can't grow anymore because of the exoskeleton, and then it sheds, grows, hardens, sheds, grows, hardens, so on. So that period in between the shed is called an instar. And basically the early instars and the late instars of this ametabolous insects look the same. Okay, and this is the ancestral or the oldest condition. Hemi, or hemispherical or half metabolous, incomplete metamorphosis. And so we see a lot of similarity between early instars and the adults, but there are some differences. So these early instars, the nymphal stage, does not have wings, versus the adult does have wings. Okay, an adult means in zoological setting, not in a human type of societal setting, but in Bio 280, when we talk about an adult, it means an individual that's capable of reproducing. So they have matured, and their sexual organs have matured, and they can produce sperm, egg, or sperm and egg. Okay, so grasshoppers are a good example of hemimetabolous metamorphosis. Another type of hemimetabolous metamorphosis is the adult is quite different from the early stages, right? So there is definitely a spectrum from no change to a little bit of change to more change, right? But the thing that kind of separates hemimetabolous, and so here's ametabolous metamorphosis. This would no, I'm sorry. Here, this is the silverfish. These creepy things that you find in your pantry. Um, and so basically, a juvenile instar looks just like the adult instar. Here, this is a true bug like stink bugs, milkweed bugs, assassin bugs, egg, nymphal stage, and then as they become adults, they gain their wings. And then third type of hemimetabolous, or second type of hemimetabolous metamorphosis is here, where the adult is quite a bit different from the nymphal juvenile stage. In fact, this juvenile stage is aquatic and the adult is terrestrial. And so ecologically, there's quite a lot of difference too. Complete or holometabolous metamorphosis. The key thing here is there's a pupa or pupal stage. Oftentimes we think of it as a cocoon, and this is in between the juvenile and the adult stage. Okay, and this is the derived condition. So this arose later in the development of insects. And what do we find in here? These are things like the megalopterans. What are those called? Dobson flies. Beetles are have complete metamorphosis. Ants and bees and wasps, stone flies, the flies, mosquitoes, things like that, and then of course all the butterflies and moths have holometabolous metamorphosis. So egg larval stage, and in between the larvae, the juvenile and the adult, is this pupal stage. Okay. Mosquitoes, which are a dipteran, right? We have the eggs, which are laid in like floating rafts on the water. They hatch into this weird little wiggling larvae that's breathes through a little spiracle on its butt. They pupate and then hatch into the adult stage. Right? Holometabolous. How do insects get oxygen? Very different than humans or other chordates. Of course, we obtain our oxygen from the atmosphere, which goes through our mouth, right down our trachea, down to our into our lungs, absorbed through our alveoli into our blood. The blood carries it to the cells that are needed. Now, insects very different. It's called a tracheal system. It's a much more passive. There is some muscular pumping, but there's a network of these tubes that exit to the outside all along the body. So oxygen enters the insect body in multiple spots, not just through the mouth. In fact, it doesn't enter through the mouth. And they have these spiracles all around. Now, there are some insects that either breathe through their skin cutaneously or they breathe through gills. But most insects have this open tracheal system that features these spiracles. Okay, so here's an example. This is a caterpillar. You see his little feet. This, and this. These are the spiracles. Okay, and what they are, you can see them here. Here are the spiracle openings, and those go back and are connected to a series of tubes. Right, so here's the spiracle into the trachea and down through their little tracheals, and then individual cells can obtain their oxygen through these small little tracheals. So what we're not talking about is oxygen going into the mouth down to the cells. The oxygen comes in through the sides of the body in these spiracles. Some aquatic insects. You can see little projections here that are thin-walled and have blood flowing through them. These are to absorb the oxygen from the water. These are all aquatic types. This is a damselfly. This is maybe a stonefly and a mayfly. So oxygen gets in through the spiracles or through the gills, and there is a role played by the blood with insects. So they do have this stuff called hemolymph, which is kind of a combination of hemo or blood and lymph. And it contains a pigment. It's a copper-based respiratory pigment. It's not a particularly effective oxygen carrier, but it does work some. It's not as good as hemoglobin, which is a iron-based respiratory pigment that vertebrates have. And so some function in the distribution of oxygen, but more about distributing hormones and nutrients that the blood distributes these things through the body. Insect mouth parts, this again goes with these appendages that insects have, and has been another sort of reason for the success of insects. But insects are amazingly adaptable. They have lots of different niches they can occupy, and they can eat lots of different things because they have mouth parts that are designed to either pierce through, say, like plant roots and suck sap. They have mouth parts that are designed for chewing, and that may be chewing plant material, but also maybe chewing other insects. They have siphoning mouth parts that allow them to use the resource of nectar in plants, sponging mouth parts, sucking mouth parts for blood. So all different ways of obtaining organic nutrients because of these mouth parts that these insects have. Other interesting aspect of insect ecology is this idea of synchronicity of life history events. So adults, you know, they emerge in these cohorts, would be all eggs laid at one time, grow up in a given cohort. Now, when those adults maybe emerge from the ground or emerge from the water to congregate and to breed, can fall into these two categories, either a synchronous emergence or asynchronous emergence. So let me just show you a pretty extreme example of the synchronous together emergence that we see in insects.
After 70 years underground, creatures are stirring. The nymphs of the periodical cicada have been biding their time. Now they march like zombies towards the nearest tree and start the climb. At first, there are merely thousands, but soon more than 1 billion swarm all over the forest. The biggest insect emergence on the planet is underway. invade the upper branches where they climb out of their external skeletons and
There's
assume their
ecdysis.
adult winged form.
Soft skinned, climbs out, inflates the wings, expands, and then hardens. In
At
fact, there's
first, they're white
ovipositor.
and soft, but they have until dawn to complete their transformation.
This is going to happen in North Georgia this summer. Union County, Yoma County.
After an absence of 17 years, the forest is now overrun by cicadas.
This species, there are other cicadas that breed every year, but
The adults are clumsy and very edible.
snap a bit.
For turtles and other inhabitants of the forest, this is a feast they're lucky to see once in their lifetime, and they gorge themselves while they can.
Striped skunk. Chipmunks even.
Times have never been so good. The cicadas have no defences and virtually offer themselves to their attackers.
Look at that raccoon.
The stream of insects is so relentless that soon all the predators are full to the point of bursting. And still the cicadas come. With the predators overwhelmed, the survivors can achieve their purpose. After mating, the adults lay their eggs.
There's the ovipositor.
In just a few days they will all die and the forest will fall silent. The cicadas here will not be heard again for another 17 years.
Unbelievable. So that's one approach, right? En masse, every 17 years emerge and breed. Okay? It's a long time to wait, but if you think about it, like I said, the predator avoidance issues, if you're 1 in a billion, the chances of you being eaten is pretty slim. Predators don't predict this emergence, so they don't have more babies in anticipation, right? They just happen to be there, and dumb luck, they eat as much as they can, but populations of predators can't build up in order to take advantage of eating all of those cicadas, right? The other thing, obviously, it's very easy to find a mate when there are billions of available, individuals. The issue is this one, right? And that is all eggs in one basket kind of deal, where if you emerge on a year that is after a terrible wildfire, if you emerge in a year where there are floods or drought or something, then this could put a big damper on the whole population of that organism, right? And this is one other example of this. I want to say this is the Missouri River or Mississippi River, and this is Doppler radar of an emergence of some type of a mayfly coming out of the river, and then probably the wind is blowing west to east, and this cloud of insects. They emerge, they don't even feed, they're there for one thing, and that is to breed. They don't even have mouth parts, a lot of these adults, and they just a massive orgy for a few nights, lay eggs again, all the adults die, and then the whole population is sort of in that cohort of eggs. All right, pretty amazing. Alternatively, some insects emerge as adults throughout the season. Okay. The benefit to that would be that you're sort of hedging your bets in terms of hazards. Ephemeral means sort of like short-lived hazards. And so, you know, fires, weather events, droughts, and things like that, you spread out the wealth a little bit and make sure that at least some of the nights when breeding happens will be good conditions. Of course, the difficulty is that it's more difficult to find a mate. So, pluses and minuses of both systems. Don't worry about this slide. And then this gets into, this is just a FYI. These are levels of different, would be order, yeah, class and insect order, Odonata, Dictyoproctos, etc., etc. We see here metamorphosis was a more recent, complete holometabolous metamorphosis was a fairly recent development, and that implies there must be something beneficial. And in fact, if you look at the most successful groups of insects would be things like beetles, flies, they all have this complete metamorphosis, which implies that it is an adaptive thing. Right? It is, I guess it has to do with if you have your juvenile stage is very different from the adult stage, and oftentimes even uses totally different food resource, then you can spread your wealth and the base of your nutrients spreads out. As a species, you are exploiting aquatic nutrients and exploiting terrestrial, you're exploiting plants and maybe exploiting, think caterpillars eat leaves as juveniles, and then as an adult butterfly they eat nectar. Two totally different food sources, so they're not competing with each other, so on and so forth. And then we'll just look at some of the different orders of insects here. Odonates, dragonflies, and damselflies. Let's see. Just curious, there's pictures of dragonfly sex, and I always forget how this works. Female curves abdomen to contact genitalia. Sperm from other males. So it's confusing. These guys are having sex, but I don't know how this works. And I still don't. Female curves abdomen to contact genitalia. So I guess the male genitalia and female genitalia are different places. Hell, I don't know. But regardless, dragonflies tend to rest with their wings down, and damselflies tend to rest with their wings up. And damselflies have thinner abdomens. Dragonflies have these thicker abdomens often, and the colors tend to be more like greens and blues, metallic colors on these damselflies. We'll definitely see some of these during boblets. Orthopterans, these are grasshoppers, katydids, crickets, important pests on agriculture settings. There's a katydid, different grasshoppers. This is Dictyoprocta, includes the walking sticks, cockroaches, the mantids, Hemiptera, true bugs, have different aquatic true bugs. This is a water strider, have milkweed bugs and assassin bugs, stink bugs, lepidopterans. These are the butterflies and moths. Lots and lots, more than 112 species, 112,000 species. Right? Amazing diversity in this group. Here's our cicadas. They're, I believe, in Homoptera. They live underground as larvae and eat the sap of tree roots. As adults, they don't eat anything. they're there for sex, and food would just get in the way. Coleoptera, there's a 500, so almost 1 in 2 animals that have been described is a type of beetle. Right? It's mind-boggling. Stag beetles and scarab beetles. I mean, just unbelievable. Hymenopteran, lots of species here too. This includes things like all the ants, but also yellow jackets, all the really important pollinators, bumblebees, honeybees. This is a flightless wasp called a cow ant or velvet ant, cow killer. Dipterans, things like mosquitoes. This is a crane fly, apple maggot flies, bee mimics. All right, lots and lots of diversity. All right, so that's Arthropod 2. That's everything you need to know for this next test.